leaders of the big countries, of the rich countries, the developed countries they call them, they should remember that they developed through colonizing the African continent.
Africa is responsible for a very low percentage of those emissions that seem to be driving the temperature changes and rainfall climate changes that are occurring across the world, and particularly badly felt in parts of Africa.
You don't take for granted that because as a government with a good will, they will apply the good policies.
The 2-degree limit refers to the difference between the temperature in the future and what it used to be before the Industrial Revolution. In certain parts of sub-Saharan Africa, a 2-degree global increase would translate more into something like a 3 to 4 degree, and possibly even higher in some areas.
One of the most immediate and pressing concerns that we live with even today in Southern Africa is rainfall variability. And certainly the climate projections are all in agreement that that's going to increase.
As we feel the pinch of climate change, we need to look at our water resources in a very, very critical way.
In the UK, we're advocating very strongly that we minimise the rise in temperatures and keep it within 2 degrees.
I think as you raise the question of climate change, you raise the profound question about what we are as humanity together.
Mimi naitwa Mwajabu Sefu, naishi Laikala, kijiji cha Laikala, kata ya Sagala, wilaya ya Kongo, mkoa wa Dodoma. Maji yapo, ila sasa kuna kipindi fulani cha mvua huwa kule kisimani marodi huwa yanatumbukiaga mvua wakati inanyesha. Sasa tunachota maji kwenye madimbu, yani machafu, hata hayastahili kunywa, hayafai kabisa. Miaka ya nyuma, tuseme labda kwenye miaka 2 hivi ndo watu walipata ya nyuma huko. Hamna, mpaka na sasa hivi watu wote wamekosa. Na zamani watu mvua ikinyesha ilikuwa inanyesha nyingi. Yaani ikinyesha inanyesha inakaa muda kidogo tena inaendelea kunyesha. Muda kidogo inaendelea kunyesha, ikabidi tuwe tunavuna. Sasa kuanzia mwaka jana na mwaka huu mvua inakata mapema, ndio maana tunakosa chakula. Wanapakia. Wakati tunaenda tumefika kule chini tena wakatupakia. Yaani uvunaji wa mwaka huu haba kwa sababu ya mvua ilikata mapema. Na jua liliwaka mno. Ndio maana yakakauka, yani kabla bila kukomaa wala nini. Kama ni mahindi yani hayakuzaa kabisa. Yalivyoanza kuchanua yakakauka hapo hapo. Hali itakuwa ni ngumu, yani inabidi sasa ndio hivyo kilimo, na hivyo watoto kama hivi mimi na watoto wa kiume natakiwa wao wanafanya bidii ya kufanya biashara. Ndio hivi sasa nitafute mtaji, niwape biashara waanze kufanya ili tujisaidie kimahitaji nyumbani. kwa sababu kama hivi mwaka huu njaa hivi, kwa hiyo misaada hapa ingetakiwa tu mikubwa tu, kwa sababu watu wa hali ya chini ni wengi mno. Hali ya mazingira ndio hivi mbaya tu, inabidi elimu iendelee kuelimishwa watu kuhusu kuhifadhi mazingira. Mbona mazingira yamekuwa mabaya?
The biggest challenge we face in Southern Africa is that farming is rain-fed. 96% of our farmers are dependent on the rain to go out and farm. So it means with the rains being impacted by climate change, with more droughts and less rain, the distribution pattern of rain has changed. What that means is farmers are really getting confused in terms of what crops to plant, when to plant, and the yields tell the story, because we are harvesting less than 50% of the optimum. Now, with the natural disasters of less water, it means you're really heading for disaster where farmers who could be producing food are now becoming dependent on food aid.
Most of the agricultural production is rain-fed, and any shift in increase in temperature and reduction in rainfall will obviously have very serious negative impacts on rain-fed agriculture.
With a 2-degree increase in air temperature, we will see a corresponding increase in water temperature. That will speed up biological processes, and if there are nutrients in there from waste products, we will see a deterioration in water quality and an increased incidence of blooms of toxic or potentially toxic cyanobacteria, blue-green algae. That will increase costs for humans and increase risks to health for humans and aquatic ecosystems.
Water is linked, by virtue of the fact that it's a fugitive resource, it's linked to so many different aspects of our daily life as human beings, that water tends to magnify and amplify the existing tensions that you find in society.
There is a likelihood in those areas that are already dry and that will get drier, that the people living there will have to guard and look after those water resources very carefully. If the pressure on those water resources is increased suddenly by the arrival of new people coming in, we can see that there is a potential for conflict.
For me, the human security is not just preventing him dying to get him to survive. So it applies both in the war situations where we go and mediate to try and put people to live together and so on in harmony. Also, we have to get people to live together in harmony in production, in combating these natural calamities, and so on.
The way I understand human security is that it's freedom from want, freedom from fear, and freedom from hazard impact.
If we have human security compromised by the loss of those things, or any one of those things, such as water, then there's an immediate change in the status, the security status of an individual or a community or a country.
When harvests fail, farmers have no choice but to rely on remittances from their children who work in town, but nobody is able to send remittances anymore. Now what that means is that they become a case for the government to look after, and that is why we have seen the numbers for the United Nations World Food Programme soar.
If you extrapolate the security of the poorest and the most vulnerable up into society, this is what determines your national security status.
There is going to be a conflict because of water. There's no doubt about that.
Because you're evaporating more water because of your increased temperature, you are now leaving behind more salts. So you're slowly poisoning the land.
Agriculture is the backbone of the African economy. Agriculture is driven by farmers. There is no room for failure. We just have to create global, regional and national plans that will make sure that the 70% who depend on farming remain in farming.
Angu ni David Bandra. Ndikaona wakanyama. Ndaba sense ni kwa ndawa ya kuda. Sometimes ngadanga kuitsoito kwa. Umu stwari kuli mapopu. Soya sunflower. Anyem. Tondi wani ndawa ito ya roga man. So life na wambu life ninju life ya numi na maningi.
Ale nibemeli yanga ndu akala umuzikwa singani kushabalala nebo ndira washirira mbu mudamba ndira washirira mapisi wega kuwashirira kuteka menda abantu ono menda imulane kabola jirobe tawitwa katebula yonse yangu yakaunka amenda alo manda wonse akadirika so twakulomba manda abantu akona njakatushupa kuja namuzi kuti tuboye kuno tuyotya ni toyanda oleja kuchita anyika yonse yakamana amana kula kubola muo munji masamu bakamana kugonka malasha so kwabola muo ingula ingala hula maningi manda mwe ala humbuka ala unkamu
Nigwari hula inzara yagari mpati maningi yauti twaba yakujita Urwa kujana maita nkonga wajana mara watu ukarisha chakuli anganda.
Ndalikwanda bokuthi bana bangu bayikhale kabotu bayiye jikolo na ndajana kayonto jana akukhala jibaka yoti ndikhale ndisunge bana bayiye kutoka niwe bakatyani bakandilele kumpela amazoba
Janga yawo pega njendira bomewo yoti wobana kuteka bakala kabotu atrisi yoti ndiza nabandi pachito monya avenzuma ava kuti kwashira bana mbonyo bandimi
Urbanization is clearly a huge challenge. I mean, urban poverty is growing in southern Africa, and in Africa, 72% of the residents of African cities are living in slums.
As population will grow, it means more and more people will need to use water. And urbanization in particular is also creating a threat to some of their water usages.
Now, with the best planners in the world and with the best amount of money that you could have, there is no way you can keep track in providing water services with this flux of people who invade these cities on a day-to-day basis.
The availability of water and associated services such as waterborne sanitation in urban centres is already under strain because of the rate at which people are moving to urban centres and cities. As this rate starts to increase and more people come in, they find that they have to stay in places that are located further and further away from where services are available, which usually means an informal method of garbage disposal or sanitation, water taken from nearby springs, groundwater, and dug wells, boreholes. Often that water is contaminated because of poor waste disposal practices.
We have a real threat on us because when you cannot supply potable water to these people, when you cannot put proper sanitation services in place, one day or another, and it's already happening, cholera will follow suit, bilharzia will follow suit, yellow fever in DRC will follow, and all this because people are coming closer and closer.
In 2008, early 2009, we got a foretaste of what environmental refugees are going to look like. In this context, they came from Zimbabwe, and they came in their droves, and they were driven by health concerns, particularly cholera. One of the reasons why there was an outbreak of cholera is because the city of Harare and the city of Bulawayo, by virtue of the fact that it's on a watershed divide, happens to sit upstream of its drinking water source. So all the sewers drain into the drinking water.
It's very difficult to say that a person is a climate change refugee or a climate change migrant even, because there are always multiple factors that would cause a person to migrate. But certainly increasing pressure on water resources is going to be one of them.
My name is Ambrose Maperana and I come from Zimbabwe. Basically I was specializing in production of vegetables. I was muchly affected by the weather change. So that's why I resorted to leave farming to come to South Africa. The amount of rainfall which we are receiving as farmers for the crops, for non-irrigating farmers, it was not adequate for us to keep on farming. It used to be better, it used to be good, but because of climate change, it was no longer good. The way from Zimbabwe to Johannesburg, it is not an easy thing. It's only because desperation and hunger back home forces people even to do whatever, even if it is dangerous. I had no money to feed the family. I had no money to do any project. I had no money to even continue my project as a farmer. I didn't know the route. I didn't know where I was going, and I had no papers. But only what I knew that is how to cross the border without papers. And it happened that the locals felt jealousy and enmity in amongst them, raised the issue of xenophobia. People were bent with tires and petrol. People were shot, were cut with axes. It was so dangerous. People were so scared. My problem could also affect someone in Europe. So to those richer countries, with their activities of pollution that is affecting the temperatures in Africa, they should be with us. They should understand it, and they should take that on the side that we are all human beings.
In a country when you have political instability, you don't have a huge amount of money to go and subsidize those farmers to see them through their difficulties. The result is a huge exodus of people who simply have to find something.
So if we assume that 2 degrees global average temperature increase is going to happen in southern Africa, some of the indication is that we could see up to 110 million more people experiencing water scarcity.
Now that poses the question, can we solve tomorrow's problem with today's science based on yesterday's experience?
We need to improve science at a local level. In other words, the application of knowledge at a local level. And in this sense, sub-Saharan Africa is still using yesterday's science at a local level.
That water is a flux. It moves in time and space. It's a fugitive resource. Therefore, if you manage it as a flux, you start developing a new science that's not yet based on observable things, but we can at least assume that these linear relationships that we understood in the past are no longer going to be applicable in the future.
And we need to see governments taking a long-term view as to what is needed to assure sufficient water of appropriate quality in the places where it's needed, at the times that it's needed.
We cannot continue with business as usual. What technologies can we generate that will help our farmers adapt? What sort of information do we need to get to the farmers in good time so that they can change the way they farm? And all that requires a new way of doing business where we all engage on a national, regional, and global plan that will make Southern Africa food secure.
It's going to take some really clever forward thinking to get all of that information together and look at the likely or probable changes that will occur, the rate of change, so you get your timing right, and get the right projects or infrastructure projects in place so that you can make sure water is available when needed.
Thinking beyond borders means taking into account holistically all the investments that are required for a safe future. These are scientific investments, infrastructural investments, social investments. If we don't get those right, climate change is going to turn what is already quite a difficult part of the world to live in into an almost impossible part of the world to live in, with all sorts of negative impacts on people.
We are simply at the edge of that paradigm, and this is the big challenge that climate change presents us. And we know from a number of other experiences that crisis is the moment that focuses the mind. And I believe we're at that point now.
So it is not us really who are at fault with this climate change. It is the big countries that are the cause of this climate change. But it affects us, even affects us more and worse than them.
And if we don't get that right, there's going to continue to be an insensitivity about what we do to this environment that ultimately is going to damage one of the most exquisite resources that we have.
Let's invest in a decision that will allow the African farmer to be at par with the international farmers who are respected for feeding their countries.
The governance should be a global governance and a constant exchange of views, a common interest. We should develop this idea of a common interest of the world, not just a common interest of a few.
The next generation has got to learn to love and live by the land.
We need solidarity because in this boat we'll be all drowned.
We need to support each other and we shall win. Thank you.